Good Wednesday evening, everybody. Rob O'Connor here from RobVenoSports.com, and it's time for our Week 11 early look at the college football slate. But before we do that, we'll take a look back at some of the biggest upsets and games of Week 10. And to do that, I need to bring in the founder of RobVenoSports.com, none other than Rob himself. Rob, how are you this evening?
Hey, Rob, I'm doing good here today. How are you?
Doing very well. Lots to talk about. We saw a lot of big games and big upsets this weekend. Let's start with probably the most shocking of them all. Texas A&M, as a pretty solid road favorite, goes down to Mississippi State, really ending their chance of any type of playoff berth. What happened to Texas A&M? Bad game, or is Mississippi State better than they've shown this year?
Yeah, I don't know that A&M woke up in time to play that game, right, Rob? By the time they realized they were in a ball game, Mississippi State had a big enough lead to where they could survive the late rally by Texas A&M. It's certainly a bad loss for Texas A&M. Defensively, not good in that game. Nick Fitzgerald, the quarterback from Mississippi State, had a huge game in that one, both running and throwing the football. So, they put themselves in a good spot the week before, and now they've taken themselves immediately out of that spot, and they lose their quarterback to boot as Trevor Knight gone for the season. I think Jake Hubenak will be the quarterback now, but it's very disappointing. You could see it in Kevin Sumlin's face after the game in the post-game conference. Certainly, I think more than anything, the play of their defense was the disappointment on that day, especially the way they allowed the quarterback to run the football. Just not good out of A&M, not really what they had showed us all season long. And so, like you and I had said last week, Rob, this college football playoff, Final Four, it'll work itself out. And for those who right off the bat were so annoyed with the fact that Texas A&M was ranked number 4, well, you don't have to worry about them anymore because they're not going to be back up in that top 4 anytime soon.
Absolutely, and I think at least for this week, I'm pretty much in agreement with the top 4 teams. I think that Alabama, which we'll talk about that game here, definitely proved that they can win a football game almost any way that they need to win it. They can win by scoring 45 and getting in the shootout and beating Ole Miss 45-40, or they can just grind it out and keep coming at you and play solid defense and force a couple timely turnovers and win a game on the road in a tough environment 10-0. What do you make of that?
Yeah, boy, that was a really good football game. I know that there was some in-game texting going on between yourself, myself, Derek, especially during the second half when that game remained 0-0, and then finally Alabama went on that 90-yard drive where Jalen Hurts winds up scoring the touchdown. You kind of felt like LSU could get the matching score, but they never did. Danny Etling took a beating. I think when we summarized the game last week, we had it pretty well summarized. I remember us having the belief that it was going to come down to the quarterbacks and which one could make the play, and Jalen Hurts' ability to use his legs to make a play we thought might come into help the winner Alabama win that game. Etling just doesn't have that ability as of yet, and they stuck to a lot of short passes. So I saw nothing. Let's put it this way: I saw nothing in LSU that would convince me that they should have been devalued as much as they were devalued in the college football playoff standings, dropped all the way to 24th. There was just really no need for that. But Alabama's the best team in the land, Rob. I mean, it's going to be hard to beat them. I know people are looking for ways right now. It reminds me of, the late 80s or mid to late 80s when people would used to try to think of ways 6 months in advance of how Mike Tyson's opponent could beat them, and then you'd turn the fight on, and 45 seconds later it would be over. This one took a little longer than 45 seconds, but a good job by Nick Saban in Alabama to get out a victory. And what was a real tough venue and what's become a real confident football team in LSU.
I still think that LSU's got a chance to run the table. I mean, that was their toughest game left by far. They're going to play Texas A&M. They're going to have a big test on their hands to get themselves back up for what's going to be a very tough road game at Arkansas this week. I mean, you saw what Arkansas did to Florida. Talk about really opening the door back up for Tennessee at this point in time. Tennessee, we talked about the turmoil of the program and the fact that that guys want to transfer out. Would Butch Jones make it through the year? Would he be fired at the end of the season? Now, all of a sudden, you're one more Florida loss away. They got a very tough road game at LSU still to come. You're one Florida loss away from having a good chance to still represent the SEC East in the championship game.
Yeah, the Florida loss disappointing as well, and that team was hardly in the game whatsoever. All the flaws of Florida came into play in that one, right? Just cannot move the ball offensively at all. Jim McElwain's team, extra week to prepare, just didn't see anything out of that offense, and now you have to wonder. Interesting, Rob, that Kentucky had a chance to go into first place in the SEC East last Saturday and wound up falling as well. It's a crazy mixed-up division. But those three teams that we're talking about here real quickly, Alabama, LSU, and Florida, all have defenses that can win you a game at any time. But with LSU and Florida, the offenses aren't quite up to speed yet. LSU's obviously far better than Florida's, but it cost the Florida Gators this past week. We'll see how this thing finishes out. Florida's going to play LSU in that makeup game, which could help or hurt. We're not sure. It'll depend on the result. Another tough loss, certainly a tough loss for the Florida Gators, and one that they should have been better prepared for, I think, at least. They did nothing offensive.
I mean, I don't think that either Florida or Tennessee has any shot to beat Alabama in the SEC championship game. And, I mean, I think with Alabama beating LSU, it would take some kind of miracle for them not to make it, assuming, of course, that they take care of business and beat Auburn.
Right.
Auburn's still lurking out there. I mean, the game is at Alabama, so you'd expect that they would win that game. But I think Auburn is probably Alabama's last true test until the college football playoff. I don't put a whole lot of stock into either Florida or Tennessee or, God forbid, it's Kentucky. Forget it. We'll just move on to another game. I mean, might as well not even show up. But I really think that if they get by Auburn, you're looking at their next big test. They'll be against a Michigan or a Clemson or maybe a Washington. And which of those teams right now, you're looking at Alabama 1, you got Michigan, Clemson, and Washington right now would be the top four teams. Of the four, I mean, I personally would lean towards Clemson being the most ready and able team to give Alabama a game. They gave Alabama a game last year. Deshaun Watson is an X factor that gives the Alabama defense a little bit of trouble. Are you with me, or do you think there's another team there that might play their way into this thing that could give Alabama a game? But I think at this point in time, it's really all about which team might be able to beat Alabama if they get the opportunity to play.
Yeah, it's interesting, Rob. The Clemson factor. Let's go with this first. As far as power ratings are concerned, current power ratings that I have for this week, game played on a neutral field, national championship game, the team that would be the shortest underdog would be Michigan. Alabama, according to my power ratings, would be a 7-point favorite on a neutral over Michigan, 8-point favorite over Ohio State, 8.5-point favorite over Clemson, 9.5, should it be Louisville? 9.5, should it be Washington? I know that the flavor of the month is Washington. And certainly Washington has shown us no reason to believe that they wouldn't be a good match for Alabama. But the problem is we just haven't seen Washington play anybody of substance yet. So I'd probably lean toward agreeing with you because Clemson had the shot at Alabama last year in the national championship game and showed very, very well offensively, matched Alabama point for point. Remember, that game came down to an onside kick by Alabama, which was a gutsy call by Nick Saban, but they did recover and went on to grab the lead and win that game. But, yeah, I would think Clemson right now. And the Michigan defense is the other thing that maybe you could, at this point in time, semi-lay your hat on. Again, we don't know a heck of a lot about Michigan because they haven't been tested really by anybody. So I think you could make a case for all those teams somewhat the same, but I would put Clemson's case above all others simply because they've been in that game before. The personnel on offense is all returning from that game last year, and the defense has shown, at least this season, to come up big in big games. Louisville, Florida State. Clemson's defense answered the bell when they had to.
I guess outside of the top four right now, who do you think is best positioned to play their way into the top four? Is it Ohio State by beating Michigan, winning a Big Ten championship? Is it a very good one-loss Louisville team? Who do you see as having the best chance to get up into the top four? And it's really a two-part question. Should one of these teams, whether it's Washington or Michigan or Clemson, lose a game, or even if one of them doesn't lose another game, is there somebody that could still do enough to impress and overtake one of those teams? I tend to think not. I think one of them is going to have to lose. But what are your thoughts on that, and who's most likely to be able to play their way in?
Well, I think certainly there's two that can play their way in. Ohio State obviously has the opportunity to play their way in because they have the game with Michigan, right? So if they beat Michigan, and Michigan currently sits at number 2, if they sit at number 2 on November 26th when Ohio State at home hosts Michigan, then Ohio State's got it all in their hands at that point in time. They looked phenomenal last week against Nebraska. The offense broke out. And remember, that's kind of the way that Urban Meyer's team has been offensively the last couple of years. Last year, there was no traction to that offense whatsoever until extremely late, week 10, week 11 of the regular season. And then they took off. And the year before that, we remember how Ohio State lost a couple of quarterbacks, and in came Cardale Jones, and all of a sudden they beat Wisconsin 59-0 in the Big Ten championship game. So Ohio State, with that 62-point performance last week, seems to have a little bit back together on the offensive side of the football. They probably have the best chance. And, of course, the second best chance would be Auburn because, as you mentioned earlier, they have their remaining game with Alabama. And Auburn certainly, even though they sit, at number 9 right now, they could play their way into the top 4. I think any win over Alabama is going to raise you above the rest of those teams. I feel like a 2-loss Auburn team might jump, a 1-loss Louisville team because Louisville just has no good wins on that schedule aside from Florida State. It's all subjective, of course, to the committee. You and I could speculate what might happen, but, at this point in time, I think if you laid out the scenario also, Rob, and I think earlier I said Michigan was number 2. They are number 3 with Clemson at number 2. But I think you could also lay out the scenario that it's not out of the realm of possibility that a number 7 Wisconsin could win the West Division and show up in the Big Ten championship game. It could be against an undefeated Michigan team, and if they were to win that game, maybe Wisconsin finds their way in there. So there's certainly some teams that can get in. I think the best path is Ohio State. Auburn, Wisconsin, and if everybody falls, Louisville's going to, in all likelihood, run the table, and they would be there with the best player in the land, Lamar Jackson. So there's a lot of football left to be played. There's a lot of scenarios, a lot of paths into that top four. We'll see how it goes, but I think that those teams all have opportunity.
I absolutely agree. And, there is a lot of football left to be played, and there are not a ton of phenomenal games on the card this week. There's a couple of test games for certain teams where, there's probably going to win, but if they lost, it wouldn't be the most shocking thing in the world. And let's start with a couple of those games. Let's go to the Big Ten. Michigan traveling to Iowa. Iowa's clearly down this year. They're not anywhere near meeting the expectations that were set for them at the beginning of the year. But if you look at some of their losses, they're in the games. They're just not getting the breaks at the end. They're just not making the right kind of plays to put themselves over the top. They're settling for field goals instead of touchdowns. Whatever the case may be, any chance that Michigan should be on upset alert this weekend at Iowa?
I think you're always at this point in time on upset alert when an above 500 team is capable, and Iowa's capable. It's not likely, but they're capable if Michigan should come in and play a sloppy game. It's possible, Rob, but you can see by the movement in the point spread in this particular game. Michigan opened 17.5. They've climbed all the way to 21.5. That there's simply no belief in the Iowa Hawkeyes where money's concerned this week. Michigan taking all of it, and rightfully so. I mean, just on paper, as we talk here on Wednesday the 9th, there's really not a solid case to be made for Iowa. The case to be made for Iowa would have to contain Michigan turnovers, Iowa short fields, Michigan sloppiness in order to lose. Iowa's offense has been dreadful all season long, and it's really hard to see any scenario in which they would consistently move the ball against Michigan. And, Jim Harbaugh's team has been an absolute first-half monster. They've gotten ahead of people by so much early that it's been impossible to come back against them. So this is a team, Michigan, that is been very well disciplined so far this year. The results speak for themselves. I'd be very shocked if Iowa were to actually win a ball game at home against Michigan. Point spread, a different thing. With Michigan at this point in time, Rob, you pay an extremely high tax if you want to bet the Michigan Wolverines. Power ratings suggest they should be a 15.5-point favorite on the road here. Like I said earlier, they opened 17.5, which shows you there was a little bit attached to them already. And it's been since carried to the 21.5 by the bettors. So you're laying almost a touchdown now, 6.5 points more than what the power ratings think you should lay. Still, with the margin of victory put up by Michigan this year, it's hard to say play against them. I don't know that I would play either way here. Total is 50. Well, I'm looking at 51s right now. If Iowa can get themselves to 17, maybe you could catch it over there. But I think it's a long, long road for them to be able to get to 17. Certainly no passing game to speak of. No way for Iowa to back Michigan up defensively. And Jim Harbaugh has just been an aggressive head coach all season long. So the line's probably in a good place for what we've seen so far. And I don't know that Michigan has shown us any factor that looks like they're intimidated by any venue. Certainly they're not going to be intimidated by Kinnick Stadium here. I think some of that luster is really worn off this season.
I would tend to agree. I don't think that they're in any danger of losing this game. It might be a little more competitive than the point spread would suggest, though. Now, this next game we're going to talk about out in the Pac-12, I do firmly believe that Washington needs to take this USC team very, very seriously. I mean, USC is much, much better than where they're ranked in these playoff rankings. I don't think there's nearly as big a spread between Washington and USC as the media would lead you to believe that there is. And I think that it's going to be a very good game out west on Saturday. Your thoughts?
Yeah, USC certainly has made the comeback on the season, right? The quarterback switch from Max Brown to Sam Darnold has been a real key for the Trojans. The added element of the running quarterback has certainly helped. Darnold's been very efficient throwing the football. USC, we talked, maybe a month ago about USC and maybe Clay Helton being in trouble out there. And right now, he wouldn't seem to be in any trouble. Of course, the result of this game could change all of that should USC get really destroyed in this one. I think people would rethink Clay Helton. Let's just start with where the point spread is on this game. Washington, a home favorite of 8, total 61.5. Those were the openers. Now we see Washington bet up to 8.5, some 9s out there, and the total bet up to 62.5. Talked earlier about not knowing the real truth about the Washington Huskies offensively and defensively, and this will likely bring out some of the real truths, how good they are, how good is that offense led by Jake Browning. Boy, we saw Ross just absolutely light up the Cal defense last week, but a little bit different when you're playing USC. So there'll be some tests here for Washington on both sides of the football. It's hard for me to bet against Washington at this point in time, Rob. I think even though there are unknowns, I think what they show me is they're good enough, and when tested, they will rise to the occasion. I think, they had what we thought was an early season showdown with Stanford. Turns out to be not much of a showdown because Stanford certainly is not as good as they've been in the past, but they did rout Stanford in that game. Husky Stadium can be a very, very difficult place. I'd like to see how Darnold responds in this one. I've talked a lot here about we don't know a lot about Washington, but let's see USC faced with a team of this caliber, and will Darnold answer the bell here? There's some great one-on-one matchups on the field, right? Juju Schuster-Smith on offense against that Washington secondary. And like I said earlier, certainly Browning and company on offense against the USC defense. In this one, I would probably, power ratings made Washington 10.5, which is a little bit above what we see right here. So I don't know that odds makers taxed Washington whatsoever. It looks like they're a little bit higher on USC at this point in time in the resurgence of the USC Trojans. Real good game. But I think the Washington defense is a difference maker in this one, Rob. I don't know how you feel about USC on that side of the football, but I'm really not
nearly as strong as Washington. And I mean, I think that Washington's going to get their points against the USC defense. I think the big issue is going to be the USC offense has looked a lot better. Are they going to be able to find some areas of weakness against the Washington defense and be able to score enough points to keep up with Washington?
Yeah, and you can't turn the ball over against this team, and that's why I said earlier, we'll see how Darnold handles this particular venue. I don't know that USC, since he's been quarterback, has been put through anywhere near as severe a test as what they're going to see here, and I'm interested to find out how the freshman quarterback reacts to this, because I think that Washington defense and that crowd especially could get to him early on, and if so, it could be a long night for USC. If they're settled in right off the bat, remember, this is a good balanced offense as well. Ronald Jones at running back. They've got multiple running backs and a pretty good offensive line as well. If they can settle in and have Washington guessing what they're going to do on offense, then we could be in for a real good ball game here. But I just don't know that this quarterback is going to respond in that positive of a manner. I know he's getting a lot of a lot of affection, a lot of love nationally right now for his play. I'm a little bit more reserved. I think Jake Browning, as you said, he's going to play well, and they're going to get their points. But I'd worry a little bit about USC offensively, and especially mistakes. Let's see if this quarterback tries to force the ball to his number one target, and let's see if they can actually run the ball against Washington. Be a good game, but I think Washington is the right side.
Rob, we got a couple of games that could be interesting, especially two in the SEC, but the one we're going to talk about right now is take a look at Georgia and Auburn. I don't think either of us would sit here and argue that Georgia's a good football team this year, or that they're going to come out and play much better than they've shown us they can. But I go back to the game against Tennessee where Georgia was pretty much written off in that game by a lot of people, and it really took a Hail Mary by Tennessee at the end of the game to get that win. Is Georgia in a position to compete that way against Auburn on Saturday?
Yeah, some things are so illogical that it's hard to make a case for teams, but that's why we see some crazy results in college football week to week. I think this might be one of them, Rob. This is a big game for Kirby Smart in particular, first-year head coach at Georgia, because his team has not come out and performed the way Georgia Bulldog fans and media expect them to play. It's been a rough season, but they did get through last week, 27-24 over Kentucky. So I think the win helps. And in this case, when you have a banged-up Sean White, and I know Sean White, the Auburn quarterback, entered the game second half last week to replace John Franklin III. And Sean White, they won't tell us what this injury is, undisclosed injury last week when he entered the game. That's why he didn't start. He led Auburn back to a victory against Vanderbilt. Boy, that was shaky at best, right? And that win over Vanderbilt, because Vanderbilt even had the ball late with a chance. But now you're on the road, between the hedges, against a team. The way I kind of see this one is for Georgia, this is going to be their so-called Super Bowl right here. I think you're going to get every ounce of effort out of Georgia. Auburn does come in with a bullseye on their chest. Like I say, it's a big game for Kirby Smart. I think the troops are going to be ready, and we'll see if they can dent the Auburn front seven. Fundamentally, you can't make as strong a case for Georgia as you could situationally. I just laid out some of the situational facts that, Georgia at home, end of season, needing a big win, coach needing a big win. They should get maximum effort and focus. All that stuff is situational where we think Georgia can play a good game. But when I get down to the fundamentals, the Auburn front seven on defense, very difficult to budge. Georgia, we know, has to run the football in order to be successful in any way, shape, or form on offense. Isaiah McKenzie, star wide receiver, he can make a big play or two in the game, and that could be a difference maker. But I'm speaking from the aspect of any kind of steady offense. Georgia needs to run the football, and we'll see if they can block Auburn on this day. Defensively, they're not, again, you can't make the fundamental case that Georgia's going to walk in there and at home shut down the Auburn offense, which has been rolling recently up until last week. But I think the Sean White injury, again, situational stuff, I think the Sean White injury could play here. And we'll see. Auburn, to me, is probably the most difficult team to power rate at this point in time. Just to give you for instance, in this game, Auburn on the road shows up power ratings-wise as a 3.5-point favorite. They opened up 10. In odds makers the last 3-4 weeks, ever since the Arkansas game, when we saw that line go crazy, odds makers have really made a huge positive adjustment for the Auburn Tigers. Bettors seem to be following it. Auburn didn't get them the money last week, but certainly in that Arkansas game they did. I think this is going to be very interesting, Rob. I would tend to take the points here rather than lay them. I think that Georgia's sitting on a big effort. could be their last huge effort of the season, but this is a team that at home I think will take this confrontation very, very seriously, and I don't know that they'll fade away. Normally you feel or you figure in college football that emotion only lasts so long in a 60-minute football game. Emotions, you can ride them for 30 minutes, maybe three-quarters, but eventually the better team gets the win. If Georgia gets a big enough lead here, be interesting to see if Auburn can catch them. At 5-4, Georgia's playing for a bowl bid as well, so I think I would take points here with the Georgia Bulldogs.
I'm leaning in that direction as well. Want to throw one more SEC game at you that we didn't have on our pre-discussions, but knowing you, I'm sure you're prepared to talk about it. LSU, coming off of a very tough, hard-fought loss to Alabama, travels to Arkansas, who's already beat Florida at home this year, who's already beat Mississippi with a healthy Chad Kelly at home this year. Does Arkansas have another big win in them?
My feeling here, Rob, is that if LSU comes to play, they're going to win this football game, and they could win it by margin. The biggest factor, and again, situational, right? Because college football is what it is. You're dealing with young guys who, from week to week, the effort level on a scale of 100%, maximum level effort, can vary, and vary widely. You just don't know exactly what you're going to get. My gut feeling is with Ed Orgeron that LSU won't let down here. I don't think that the Alabama 10-0 loss is going to carry over to this week. Remember, LSU and Arkansas, this game used to be played the day after Thanksgiving on a yearly traditional basis. There's a little bit of hatred there between these two teams, and I don't know that LSU is going to walk in here knowing that it's Arkansas and be caught in a hangover position. So from that situational angle, from that mindset, then I look at the fundamentals of this game, and it's just no comparison on defenses here. We saw Leonard Fournette get stoned last week. Leonard Fournette could go for 250 against this Arkansas team. Now, give Brett Bielema credit. Brett Bielema said last week in their victory that in no way, shape, or form were they going to lose that game with their run defense. They put 8-9 in the box, whatever it took, and they were going to force Luke Del Rio to throw the football. It's a different beast here. LSU's got legitimate NFL weapons. If it's not Fournette, it's Darius Geis. If it's not Darius Geis, Danny Etling is going to be extremely happy to see this step down in class of defense that he's going to face here. So for me, I think it's LSU or bust in this one. I just don't, in order to play Arkansas, you have to, in my mind at least, you have to believe that LSU is going to come in here still sad over the fact that they lost 10-0. Perhaps you feel like they left everything they have on the field last Saturday night in Baton Rouge. I just don't happen to feel that way. I think they're going to close the season strong. You're talking about a team right now that where their losses are concerned. I mean, let's face it. You've lost to Auburn and you've lost to Alabama, and there's nothing wrong with that. Those two teams are inside the top 10. Both happen to be SEC West Division foes, which kills them for winning a division. But I think this football team is going to close strong. They've got South Alabama after this, so there's no look ahead. Then they have A&M, and we'll see if they land in a bowl bid on New Year's Day, something really good. I think they probably will. So for me, it would be LSU in this contest. I don't think Bielema's team is going to have anywhere near the success that they had last week against Florida.
I also think that Ed Orgeron is well aware of the letdowns that have happened the past couple of years after the Alabama game for LSU, and I think that he will have his team ready to play come Saturday. Looking ahead now to a game that doesn't exactly scream sexy and exciting, but nonetheless, it's a huge game in the Big Ten. As you've got a ton of teams fighting for the right to play. either Michigan or Ohio State for the Big Ten title. And Nebraska and Minnesota will battle it out, and the loser's pretty much done. Kind of a make or break game, as we like to say here on the show. What do you think in that one?
That's an interesting one. Here's another case, again, where, Nebraska came so close, Rob, a couple of weeks back in that Wisconsin game. They could be sitting really pretty in that division right now, but they wound up losing that game in overtime to Wisconsin. There goes their tiebreaker with them. Then they come back and get absolutely mauled by Ohio State last Saturday. Where's this team mentally right now? It's an interesting question. I tend to think, as unlucky as Nebraska was in the 2015 season, remember how many heartbreaking losses they endured, they've kind of been not scoreboard related, but semi-lucky the other way this year. I think they were exposed somewhat by Purdue in that contest where they just couldn't consistently run the football against a ragged Purdue defensive front. So I think we saw some signs of Nebraska, at least on the offensive side of the football, not being as good as their results would have indicated. It panned out finally in the Ohio State game. We'll see what they bring against Minnesota. I think these two teams are pretty evenly matched. Minnesota's got a devastating ground game as well. They've got while not a superstar quarterback, Mitch Leidner, as experienced a quarterback as you can have on a football team. So I don't know that they will make any silly mistakes in this one. This is a real interesting game for me, like I say, where mindset is concerned on the Nebraska side. I wonder how they bounce back here. I don't know that they're good enough to bounce back really effectively here. You have to continue to have some doubts about Tommy Armstrong. As phenomenal as he can look at times, he just turns the ball over and still makes ridiculous decisions, which could cost them here against Minnesota. You talked about the tightness of that West Division in the Big Ten. You're looking at Wisconsin 4-2, Minnesota 4-2, Nebraska 4-2. This is a monster game for the Nebraska Cornhuskers, because they would have lost to Wisconsin and Minnesota should they lose here. And on the other hand, it's no less important for Minnesota. It's equally as important for them. So good football game. I just think at this point in time, I would lean towards Minnesota. I think they're well coached. I think the ground game is good enough to keep them in the entire way. And I also think that since they've been able to get some bodies back, Minnesota, whether it be due to early season suspensions, whether it be due to early season injuries, they've had a lot of players in and out on that defensive side of the football. They look a little more stable to me on defense this late in the season. So for me, I think I would look at Minnesota. Game open -8. Nebraska home favorite. It's come down to Nebraska -7. Money somewhat agreeing with my stance here on the game, and total at 50 now down to 49. So I think people looking at a game where the ground games may decide it. As long as Minnesota can avoid allowing the big play pass-wise, I think they should be in this one the whole way. I look for a real good contest with, even if Nebraska wins, I don't know that they'll win by more than 7.
Rob, I'm going to throw one more Big Ten game at you that, again, we didn't talk about. But I want to go ahead and I want to put somebody on upset alert this week. And you've heard me rail against them for the last 2 weeks. I think they are the most overrated team in all of college football. And I think Penn State should really be on alert traveling to Indiana this week. I think that Indiana is a very good football team. They're getting 7 points at home. I definitely lean the direction of the 7 points. I like that for sure. But I think there's a chance at an outright upset. I still am not sold on Penn State as the number 10 team in this college football standings. Are talking one win against Ohio State, and they're just hanging their hats on it. And I don't necessarily see them being that good, and I think Indiana can give them the game. Are you with me on this one?
This is a real interesting football game, Rob, because really good football teams, and we'll preface really good by saying, hey, top 10 football teams, right? That's what Penn State is considered right now by the College Football Playoff Committee, a top 10 football team. That's the ranking that they sit with right now. Those types of teams are able to confidently go on the road and come away with victories. Penn State, boy, if you just think back to that Ohio State game a couple of weeks ago, they were in deep trouble in the fourth quarter. That's 2 weeks ago. Deep trouble in the fourth quarter. They needed a 17-point fourth to pull that game out. Ohio State turns it over on their last possession, and Penn State wins that football game. So, I mean, if they don't come back from 21-7 down in the fourth, we're not even talking about Penn State at this point in time. However,
they're not even ranked right now if they don't win that game. I don't even think they're in the top 25, let alone number 10.
Which really is the baffling part of the number 10. How did they get to number 10? But, a win is a win is a win in the eyes of regular rankings. It doesn't necessarily work that way, power ratings-wise, point spread-wise, in that world. But the rosier side of the picture for Penn State is the fact that 3 of the last 4 games, if we take the Ohio State game out, the other 3 games in that foursome, their last 4, are Maryland, Purdue, and Iowa. In those 3 games, Penn State has totaled over 500 yards of offense in all 3 of those games. Against Ohio State, it wasn't as pretty. They only gained 276. While Indiana's an improved defensive team, they certainly are, they can be had. We saw it a couple of weeks ago when Maryland came into Indiana and rolled them for 517 yards and 36 points. I think you're looking at a high-scoring contest here, and with what I saw what we've seen out of the Indiana offense the last 2 weeks, could very well be last team with the ball wins, and I wouldn't put it past Indiana at home to be able to win this football game. All season long, Indiana's been a totally different football team than what we're used to, right? Up until the Maryland game, you had to question, where's this Indiana offense? Kevin Wilson always has a high-powered offense. Richard Lago at quarterback hadn't really been performing very well at all. And all of a sudden, the last 2 weeks, Kevin Wilson's offense has really come out of the woodwork here. They're able to run the football very well. I temper my excitement based on the fact that Indiana's played Maryland and Rutgers the last 2 weeks, certainly not good defensive teams. Penn State's better on the defensive side of the ball than either of those teams, certainly. And Penn State's gotten guys back at the linebacker position, which has helped them. However, all that being said, I still feel like Indiana's offense with Divine Redding and Lago, they can move the football here. And at home, it's going to be a very big game for them. And we just don't know how Penn State is going to handle these types of situations. For Indiana, you're 5-4 right now. You need that 6th win to gain bowl eligibility. Next week is against Michigan. It's not likely to happen there. The last week is Purdue. Sure, they'll probably win that game and get their 6th win. But I think that if I'm Kevin Wilson, I'm telling my team right now, a win here and we finish over 500 for the season, or the potential is there to finish over 500 at 7-5 for the year. They'll be ready. Let's see how Franklin's team plays this one, but I think what you can expect here is both offenses to be real potent. The total here opened 58.5, Rob, which to me was a little bit low considering the current form of these two offenses. I could see that total maybe back in week 5, but as we speak right now, I think 58.5 was too low of an over-under. We've seen it pushed up to 59.5 right now, and I wouldn't be surprised if it crawls up to 60 and above.
Well, Rob, that good analysis there for a game we weren't having on our little card to discuss ahead of time. The last game we did have on the card, and it's not a huge game by any stretch of the imagination. Just wanted to talk about it. All the controversy going on with Baylor, and then you've got Oklahoma looking to continue a perfect Big 12 season because of their 2 losses out of conference to Houston and Ohio State. Probably a perfect Big 12 season is not going to be enough to get them into a conference, well, they didn't have a conference championship game, but it's not going to be enough to get them into the top four, make the playoffs. I mean, they could end up with a relatively strong bowl game. What do you think? I don't think that Oklahoma's got anything to worry about. You with me on that, or do you think that maybe Baylor will get their act together and show them play the football they're capable of playing?
Yeah, and I think the Big 12 is so week to week with these teams, Rob. You and I have talked about it over and over again about how these top 7 teams in the Big 12 are so interchangeable. And, you know, we saw it out of TCU last week, right? TCU had played no offense for 2 weeks. Bang. All the offense in the world against Baylor. Just when people started to forget and write TCU off, here comes 62 points. They were the right side from start to finish. Baylor's capable of that any week with Seth Russell at quarterback. I think, he came out of the concussion protocol last week and started. Shock Linwood was questionable all week long, but he started. They didn't look like the same offense. This is an extra week to be a little bit healthier. And Oklahoma, boy, oh boy, are they vulnerable in that secondary. And if KD Cannon and these guys get going here, it could be it's been a long day a lot of times this year already for Oklahoma. And Texas Tech put 59 on this team. And we saw Texas put 40 on this team, drag them to the limits. We saw TCU put 46 on this team. All 3 of those games right there for Oklahoma are no better than 7-point wins. The biggest margin of victory was the 7-point win they got over Texas Tech, 66-59. The other 2 games you're talking about 5- and 6-point wins, barely beating people. So I do think Baylor's got a real opportunity here. Oklahoma, like I say, all season long, has shown the ability, inside the conference at least, to come out on the good end of shootouts. This is going to be another shootout in my estimation.
Yes, it will be.
And we're going to see if at home they can come out on the good side of this. Once again, it's a Baylor offensive unit that's going to go to Norman, Oklahoma, and that's going to mean nothing. They could care less where they play this team. They're not going to be intimidated by the crowd of Oklahoma, so you can throw that out the window. And then we'll see from there. I think it's very exciting. I'm trying to get right now for us the total on this game because I believe it'll be a very high scoring game. Yeah, and there you go. I mean, obviously, these Big 12 teams make 80 look small, too. It's unbelievable how small they make 80 points look. Texas Tech and Texas last week, I think 45-37. Could have been a lot more than that. That's 82. But I would certainly think that Seth Russell and company come back here, and there's just no way, shape, or form off of what they've shown us against high-powered offenses in the Big 12 this year that I want to lay 16 with Oklahoma. Just out of the question, I think I would love to take the points there with the Baylor Bears. I think if they don't win, they'll stick within 15.5, 16 points.
Well, Rob, that is the games that we had marked off to discuss. Any final thoughts, parting words, anything else you think that our listening audience should be aware of? Any teams that need a big win this week for a bowl game? Any good situational plays? Anything else at all you want to talk about?
Well, I think since we've been talking about make or break stuff for the last part of the conversation here, Rob, certainly Kentucky, Tennessee fits that bill, right? The SEC East is still up for grabs. And we talked about it right off the top on the show when we were discussing Florida's loss last week. But Florida has left the door wide open in that East Division here, because if they do lose to LSU when they play that game, and there's a good likelihood that they will lose to LSU, Florida winds up with 3 losses inside the conference. Kentucky right now with 3 losses. Tennessee with 3 losses and a very, very easy schedule remaining, or at least a schedule where they'll be favored remaining. Tennessee still has a shot to show up in that SEC title game. So this is a showdown. Kentucky traveling to Tennessee. Winner stays in that SEC East race. Loser goes home. We know that Tennessee at one point trailed Florida 21-0 earlier this year and came back with 38 unanswered. That tiebreaker sits in their lap. That's good news for them. They opened 11 here. They're bet up now to 13.5. Pretty sure I understand why. We know that there was a lot of commotion at Tennessee prior to last week's game, whether it be the cloud swirling around Butch Johnson's head, whether it had been Jalen Hurd's decision to transfer. A lot of things, a lot of distractions for Tennessee, and they came out and played as good a football game as they played all season long last week. So maybe Tennessee's ready to close the season strong. I think that's a game to keep your eye on. Certainly bettors like the Tennessee side, like I say, up from 11 to minus 13.5.
Well, Rob, that definitely I think that Tennessee will take care of business on Saturday, and I just don't see Kentucky being able to go into that kind of environment and win a football game. I don't think they're there as a program. Much improved over what they've been, but they're not there as a program yet as far as I'm concerned, and I think it's a good spot for Tennessee. I think their cupcake game last week came at an absolute perfect time for them. Might help them right the ship for the stretch run here.
And no doubt about it, and it would be good news for them. I mean, the fan base would be happy if they even got the opportunity to play Alabama in a title game. Obviously, neither of us believe that they can win that game, but to get there would be big for this team, which has really, once again, lived under expectations. They can correct some wrongs here in the last few weeks. I think it might start here this Saturday.
Well, Rob, I think we've covered it all. There's a lot of good games this weekend, and appreciate your time this evening. Don't forget, everybody, get over to robvenosports.com. That's robvenosports.com. Get all of Rob's power rankings, statistics, weather reports, injury updates. It's really a great source for all of your handicapping information. And, of course, you've got Rob, myself, and Derek Davis with our selections available each and every week. So hop on over and grab a package from us. And, Rob, that'll do it for this week. We'll be back next week. We'll take a look at what we saw in a pretty important Week 11 of the college football season, and we'll look ahead to Week 12. The season's really starting to wind down, and it is crunch time. Rob, I'll talk to you next week.
We'll do the same, Rob. Good show once again, and look forward to this weekend. For everybody out there, hope all your plays are successful ones, and we will talk to you again next Wednesday.
For Rob Veno, I'm Rob O'Connor. We'll talk to you next week.